Everybody, I'm Cindy, and I work here at the Orion Center at Beaumont as a Beaumont Wellness Liaison. And I'd like to introduce to you Dr. Lucy Sternburgh, and she's going to do the program you came today for the mindfulness. So, Lucy,
Thank you. Yeah, really delighted to see so many of you here today. So thanks for being here, and a lot of gratitude to Cindy and the folks here at the Orion Center for making this possible. Can you hear me okay so far?
Yeah.
Okay. At any point as we go through this, please feel free to let me know if you need me to speak up a little bit. It's like Cindy's going to close the doors right now. And really the intention of this presentation is to get to know this topic a little bit, to be able to interact and practice together a little bit. So please feel free, if you have questions as I go through this, please just feel free to raise your hand. And of course, we'll save some dedicated time for that at the end. But this is really a product of work that my colleague, Dr. Ruth Lerman, and I have done at Beaumont to bring this idea, this, you could say, way of being into the medical mainstream here at Beaumont. So basically what I would like to do just to get us started, there we go, is actually just spend a few moments practicing mindfulness together. The name that you'll hear me repeat throughout the presentation is a man named Dr. Jon Kabat-Zinn. That may sound familiar to some. He's a big name in the biz. And what he says about learning mindfulness is that just simply hearing someone talk about it or reading about it is like going to a restaurant and eating the menu. You just don't really get a taste for it. So what I'd like to do is give you a chance to actually have a taste of what we're here to talk about today. Does that sound okay to everybody? And there's a good chance that you are already practicing mindfulness, even as you sit here and listen. There's not much that we need to do to shift into a way of being that is really simply just about noticing what's happening. So let me pause here just for a second. I think that's happening. I don't want it to do it while we're, yeah, it was set email. Okay, so one of the ways that we can just start to more maybe formally cultivate practicing mindfulness is if you were just to notice whatever it is that you can see. You might let your eyes just sort of roam around the room for a moment, and just taking a moment to connect really immediately with whatever it is that you're seeing. So you might notice where the doors, the windows, the screen, maybe where the ceiling meets the wall or the wall meets the floor. Just aware of color, texture, light, whatever it is that your eyes are seeing is part of this moment, right? So then, what I'll invite you to do is you can either simply start to soften your gaze a little bit, so you might just kind of let it drop down, maybe somewhere in front of you where it's lower and steady. Another perfectly fine option is to allow your eyes to close, and it's no problem either way. They can be open or closed, whatever feels right for you. And then what I'll invite you to do is the same thing, but this time with your ears. Just beginning to tune in to whatever it is that your ears are receiving. So there may be times where there are sounds that are coming from outside of this room, further away. And there may be other times where there are sounds arising here in this room, right? Including these words. So taking these moments just to simply notice sounds as they come and go. Maybe they're quiet, maybe they're loud, maybe they're constant or more intermittent. And you might notice if your mind has any tendency to be identifying what the sound is, or maybe the mind is busy liking it or finding certain sounds unpleasant or distracting. Seeing if it's possible to simply be aware of the sounds themselves. So just noticing, hearing, whatever is available to be heard. So you could either stay just like this, just listening to sounds as they come and go. Another option, if you like, is to start to tune in a little more closely to what it's like to be sitting in the chair that you're sitting in right now. Maybe you can feel your feet on the floor or wherever they are. Maybe you can feel the back of your thighs or lower back contacting the chair, the seat beneath you. So just having an awareness of the lower body as it is. And then very gently, just starting to move your awareness from your lower body up into your torso. Just noticing whatever it is that's noticeable for you. Maybe you can feel your chest rising and falling with each breath. Or maybe you're noticing wherever your hands are resting, positioning of the shoulders. So then just allowing yourself to feel whatever it is that's present right now, if that feels right for you. Maybe you're cold, maybe you're warm, maybe there's tingling, maybe there's tension. There's no right or wrong way to be feeling right now, just starting to notice, what's here in this moment? And then I'll invite you just to take a few nice, easy breaths. Maybe it's a deeper, fuller breath than you've taken yet today. And as you breathe in and breathe out, seeing if you can let your awareness come to wherever it is that your breath is most noticeable. Maybe it's where it comes in and out of your nose. Maybe it's the rise and fall of your chest. Or maybe it's nowhere in particular. Maybe it's just the whole body breathing. Seeing for you, where is the breath noticeable? And so mindfulness can be defined as the awareness that arises through paying attention on purpose in the present moment, non-judgmentally. So in this moment, being aware of the breath as the body breathes in and as the body breathes out. Inhaling, exhaling. Just a single breath at a time. Breath might be fast or slow, deep or shallow. Again, there's no right or wrong way. We're simply noticing. Breathing is happening right now. So for each and every one of us, probably many times already in these moments, the mind has a tendency to wander. We start thinking or remembering or planning or questioning. And in this practice, we simply notice, thinking. And as often as possible, just redirecting ourselves back to the breath, back to the sounds, back to being in this moment. Seeing if we can simply allow the unfolding of each moment to happen, knowing that right now there's nothing we actually need to be doing. This is a practice of simply being a human being. So I'll invite you just to spend the next few moments practicing on your own without the guidance of my voice, simply aware of breathing in, aware of breathing out, noticing when the mind wanders and gently beginning again. Simply noticing where is the mind now. And in the final moments of this practice, simply beginning again and again and again. So to close, I'll invite you again just to come back to the simplicity of simply sitting here, breathing, surrounded by others doing the same, and the sounds that are here. So to close, you'll hear the sound of a bell. I want to invite you just to notice the sound as it arises. It'll be here for some brief period of time, and eventually it'll completely fade away. That will signify the end of this formal practice together. I want to invite you to really take your time. You might feel like you could use a little stretch, or maybe your body needs to be repositioned a little bit. When it feels right for you to gradually open your eyes, again, you might end just the same way we began, by just letting your eyes take in whatever it is that's here to be seen. So I want to thank you for your participation in the practice. You probably hear a pin drop in this room. It's so quiet there. And also invite you just to spend a moment. I'll pause so that you can just kind of reflect for yourself on whatever your experience was during that about 10-minute practice together. You might just take a note of whatever it was that you were hearing in the surroundings or seeing when you looked around the room. Or maybe there was something that you could physically feel, your feet on the floor or the support of the chair, the warmth of your hands, or maybe they were cool or cold. And then lastly, maybe reflecting on whatever it was that you noticed about the tendency of your own wandering mind. You know, this really isn't a problem. It's just something for us to notice. Oh, I was remembering, or I was planning, or I was thinking, how long are we doing this for? That's another normal one. Yeah, so, you know, the kind of the question for this reflection is just, what was noticeable for me? No right or wrong, no expectation. And then maybe there's a brave volunteer or two that would be willing just to say a few words for the group. What did you notice? And essentially, we were not doing anything, right? There was no busyness, nothing to get done. We were just sitting here, being human beings. What's that like? Please.
I noticed the stress in my body and where it was, and my neck was like, I must have had that slept on or something, and it was where the stress was.
Yeah. I hear a lot about the tension and neck and back and shoulders. Yeah. And can I ask, when you notice that, how did you work with it? Did anything happen when you brought your awareness to it? Did it change in any way?
Well, you mean did it get less?
Maybe less or maybe more. I don't know.
More aware of it so I could treat it,
Yeah.
exercising or whatever.
Okay.
I didn't feel it before, but after that exercise or doing it, I
Right.
felt it.
You became aware.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm not saying it's better now, but
You just became aware.
aware that I need to do something about it.
Got it. Got it. Wonderful. Thank you. Please.
I have a question. Are we still listening to the sounds and maybe seeing things in our mind's eye, or?
That's a great question. You know, so what we did together from the time that I started talking about looking around the room until, that was what we call formal practice, where we were really taking a set amount of time. In this class, it's about 10 minutes to really, in a sort of systematic way, be present. What I intended to do was sort of shift us more into a reflection or, you know, kind of discussion. But there's nothing that says you can't keep being present, right? That, I mean, really the whole idea of all of this is that ultimately we go through our day and lives being aware. So I don't want to suggest that you should stop being aware. But, you know, but I think there's also a difference between what we did, which you could think of as a formal meditation practice, and now shifting into more of a reflection or discussion around what was noticed. Does that help?
Yes,
Yeah.
so the goal is not to do the formal. The goal is to get yourself to...
I wouldn't say, and this can sound very paradoxical, the goal during our formal practice is very much like when we go to do a physical exercise. So when we go out to walk or when we do something repetitive, when we are doing the formal exercise, it is like that repetition of, okay, my mind wandered off, but I'm coming back. I'm coming back. And we repeat that process over and over again. And then the hope is, just like when we do physical exercise, that then as we go through our life, we're feeling stronger, we're feeling more limber. And so the idea is that we take some of the benefit that we gain during our formal practice, and it shows up in our regular life. Now, when we're listening to our family member, we're really listening, etc., something like that.
Is there benefit to doing it with a group energy, or is
There, for some people, it's something they do alone. For some people, it's something they find a lot of support in doing in a group. Yeah. Thank you. Please.
I had a question.
Yeah.
When you're doing the formal
Mm-hmm.
meditation like we just did,
Mm-hmm.
if an annoying sound comes in,
Yeah. Yeah.
I heard one today.
Uh-huh.
How do you deal with that? How do you
Yeah,
maintain your
this is wonderful.
quiet?
Yeah, this is wonderful. So I sort of alluded to that the mind might be identifying some sounds as pleasing,
Yeah.
other sounds as displeasing, and some maybe neither. They're just, if you notice, sometimes you can hear the hum of the HVAC system. And for some of us, that's just sort of like white noise. It's neither pleasing or displeasing. And really, the idea here is that we simply notice, oh, here I am finding this pleasing, or here I am finding this displeasing.
So if it's displeasing, you shouldn't try to shove that out. and
Right,
be
right. We
zen.
are essentially not trying to push anything away, because ultimately, can we? Can we really? Is our not liking going to make it stop or disappear? We're simply becoming more aware of. Oh, wow. I mean, for some people here, that whole thing might have sounded displeasing. Everything about it, and that's something to notice.
I noticed, I heard the vacuum start. and
Yeah,
stop.
sure.
It reminded me of home.
Yeah. Let's take one more and then I'll jump in, please.
Especially in our age group, tinnitus.
Absolutely, absolutely, right. Tinnitus, be there for sure. Yeah. And there might have been really an awareness of that during that time.
Do you use this treatment for kids with ADH too? Because they have a lot of disfocusing.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
the mind doesn't connect with what they're,
Right.
directly, and, I mean, they can hear it, but then they get distracted
Right,
with it. So
right.
if you can,
Yeah.
they can be aware of it, then maybe they won't get distracted.
It's a wonderful preview into what I would love to talk a little bit about. So let me dive in here to the and I'm only going to spend a few minutes to just keep these light and hopefully of use to you. The first thing I want to cover during the next, 15, 20 minutes or so is just what is mindfulness. The second will be about the benefits, and I think you're alluding to one for sure. The third will just be a little bit more about how to practice what it is that we'll be talking about. And then I'll leave you with some resources, and we'll have more time for Q&A at the end. So let's shift gears. That first question, what is mindfulness? And I don't think there has to be a right or wrong answer. That's a theme for this class today. What do you think of when you hear the word mindfulness? Are there other key words or phrases that come to your mind that you think of? What do you think of when you hear the word?
Presence.
Presence, thank you.
Concentration.
Concentration, excellent. Stillness, yeah. Wonderful. Please.
Awareness.
Awareness, yes, wonderful. Yeah, these are all, I think, pointing at. I'll give you the really standard definition. I mentioned this fellow's name at the very beginning. Dr. John Kabat-Zinn is the author of the classic text, Full Catastrophe Living, and he started the stress reduction clinic at UMass Medical Center in 1979. So it's been around for 40 years now. And he says this, that mindfulness is the awareness that arises when we pay attention, so a fairly cognitive process, on purpose, in the present moment, and you see what I double underlined? Non-judgmentally, which is probably the heart of the thing, the real essence of it. So other scholars have sort of formulated this same definition, but into this more Venn diagram type way of displaying the same thing. As again, we have this very cognitive process, a faculty to be able to tune in, but we have to realize that actually we have to choose to do that. That our default mode, if we just let our minds go, the default mode is sort of an automatic pilot. Have you ever found yourself just sort of going through the motions if you're, maybe tired or not really feeling well or paying all that much attention, and all of a sudden you're doing something that you already did. Like for me, sometimes it's in the shower and I'm shampooing the hair. It's like, I've already shampooed the hair. Why am I doing it again? So it's recognizing, wait a second. I have to tune in. I have to choose to pay attention in the moment. And then lastly, the attitude. And again, this attitude of that's interested not so much in the past or the future, but what's happening right now, and non-judgmentally. And some would say that this is our biggest challenge, this being non-judgmental. Why? Why do you think when you hear the word judgment, us human beings being judgmental toward ourselves, toward our experience, toward others, toward anything. What do you think that means? What's a judgment?
I think it means you're assessing what's going on.
Yes.
And then your brain is saying, this is good and this is bad. I mean, you're simply analyzing what it is and
Yeah.
seeing what you can use.
Yeah, yeah. Evaluating, assessing, similar. Yeah, and I think the real jackpot there was what you said about good and bad. I like it, I don't like it. It's often very dichotomous or black and white. There's no gray. It's just yes or no, this or that. And so judgments, we tend to be sort of grasping hold to a liking, a not liking, a this or a that. And with not being more non-judgmental, you might say we soften that grip a little bit. Everybody try that. Exactly. That leaves a little more room for curiosity, for investigation, for maybe some more acceptance, more kindness. So when we're less judgmental, we're more willing to see, I'm not sure, let's see. So mindfulness can be kind of confused. I think it's kind of a buzzword, and I don't know if you've seen all the magazines with the cover, Time magazine, Newsweek magazine, kind of becomes sort of a buzzword and gets confused of what actually is. It's not about having a blank mind. That's probably the biggest misconception, that being mindful means somehow we have cleared the mind. Well, first and foremost, let's think about all the other key organs in our bodies. Our hearts beat, our lungs breathe. Yes, our brains think, right? And this isn't about trying to stop the thinking. It's more about simply becoming aware of the thoughts themselves. So it's not having a blank mind. It's not about being happy all the time. That might be very artificial or inauthentic. It's not about being emotionless. We're not saying, whatever, it doesn't matter. It's not that way. This is more discerning than that. It's not about withdrawing from life, and it's not about escaping pain or difficulty. It's not another way to numb out to the difficult things that happen in our lives. It's really more about actually turning toward the things that are difficult, toward the way things really are. That's a synonym or a metaphor that's often used about mindfulness, is that it's like putting on a clean pair of glasses and seeing things as they really are, as we cultivate greater awareness, deeper insight into the nature of our own minds, our own lives. And so, as human beings, let's get back to what we have here to work with. We have what's called the triad of awareness. You could think of this as simply SET, sensations, which represent all things bodily, right? When we feel, as was mentioned, the tension in the neck or the whatever it is, the tingling in the fingertips, any form of sensation, including the breath, and then any form of emotion or thought. You might say those two on the bottom are really closely linked, right? Things that are arising in our own minds. But the important thing to know, and this is really the whole evolution of what's known as mind-body medicine, is suggesting that there's a relationship between what's happening in our minds and in our bodies. So we've probably all experienced something stressful. Let's say we're driving, we're just trying to get to the grocery store, and someone cuts us off, or we're stuck in traffic, or there's something frustrating like that that's happening. Well, in a moment like that, where something unpleasant is happening, it basically, if we teased it apart, there's some sensation. Maybe it's that real tight grip on the steering wheel and the jaw clenching up. There might be an emotion like fear or anger, and there might be a thought like, why don't those people know how to drive, or people are so rude, whatever it is that comes to our mind. And simply being able to name, here's the sensation, here's the emotion, and here's the thought, allows us to take something that might feel kind of nebulous, like stress, and be able to actually identify its parts, to break it down into what it actually is. So that's how this framework is used. I want to shift into the second question. What are the benefits? And maybe based on what we've already been talking about, you have some sense of how this could maybe be useful in our lives and in the world. And one way, and I think the question about attention really alluded to this in my mind, is that we live in a world, of course, where there is so much distraction, where we may feel so pulled to this application and this and that, or whatever it is, things that we need to do, and all this buzz going on in our minds. So mindfulness, you might say, is the opposite of multitasking. It is about coming back to the basics of single tasking, doing one thing at a time, and really being aware of what that is that's happening. There's also a whole host of research. You can see the lists here of research that suggests benefits for a number of both physical and mental health benefits. Again, most of this is now at least 40 years of research that's been published, including just general stress. You know, it doesn't just necessarily have to be a treatment per se, but just improved well-being and sense of peace and contentment. There's something now that we pretty much well understand about the human brain. Maybe you've heard of an author named Rick Hansen. He says this, that the human brain has a negativity bias, that it's hardwired to let the things that are wrong, the threats, the things that have not been pleasant, be Velcro for negativity. The brain just holds on to those things. And yet the brain also has a tendency, remember what used to be on pans so things didn't stick? Teflon for positivity, meaning that we have no real physiological or psychological reason to hold on to the good things. Our bodies don't necessarily need that for survival. So if we're constantly kind of, let's say, biased toward what's wrong, things tend to seem even worse, than maybe they actually are. And so, again, kind of staying with this idea about how is the brain wired. If you took your hand, this is just a very basic little handy model of the brain. And so the wrist here, the palm area, would represent what we call the reptilian brain. This is the most primitive portion of the brain, right, that even reptiles have. Very basic. And then if you went up higher, let's talk first here about like the thumb and this mid portion of the brain, what we call the mammalian brain. Okay, so those of us who live with other mammals, dogs and cats, etc., they have this more evolved, more sophisticated brain than a lizard. But lastly, this front portion of the brain, so in this model it would be the part right here behind the forehead. We can call this part really the human portion of the brain, okay? And I'll show you next what these parts are actually responsible for. The reptilian brain is, you've heard of fight, flight, freeze, our basic stress reaction. That's all happening in the reptilian brain. Whereas the mammalian brain, this more mid portion of the brain, has more sophisticated feelings, emotions. For instance, those of us that live with dogs and cats know that they can be anxious to, happy to, just like us. And then ultimately, this human brain, the most evolved portion of the brain, is where our real capacity is for discernment, for more, more sophisticated, more advanced levels of thinking. And of course, that's really what we, benefit most from being able to utilize that portion of the brain. And so the model sort of suggests that when stressful things are happening, and we're just kind of, something stressful happens and we just react. It's a habit, it's, the proverbial coming home and kicking the dog type situation. That essentially when that happens, we condition ourselves to just keep reacting. Something stressful happens and we react. Something stressful happens and we react. So when this, without much awareness, that's just happening over and over again. And with the hand model, we call that flipping our lids. We neurologically sort of, this whole more sophisticated part of the brain just goes offline. And when we're just in a stress reactivity, it's sometimes referred to as what's called amygdala hijack. The portion of the brain that's fight, flight, freeze is just taking over. And it causes that whole cascade of the stress reaction. But when we have a little bit of mindfulness, a little bit of awareness on board, the more we are realizing what's happening, it allows us again to have greater discernment, and rather than just being in our patterns and our habits, we choose. The brain can be just in the opposite way. Just like we could be conditioned to flip our lid, we can be conditioned to say, wait a second, let me pause, let me take a breath. What really matters here, right? And it's this portion of our brain that's allowing us to do that, the prefrontal cortex. And that's good news. And basically now, a lot of scientific evidence suggests that our brains can be strengthened, can develop this capacity at any time. That it's simply a matter of realizing, oh, I've gotten into this habit, or I've gone on automatic pilot. Let me come back to what's here. So lastly, this question around how to strengthen. If this is really just like strengthening a muscle, just like we would do in physical exercise, how can we actually strengthen the prefrontal cortex to be more aware, more discerning? Well, there's Jon Kabat-Zinn, who I mentioned earlier, created this intervention or treatment called MBSR, Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction. And that's what the long acronym stands for there. It's essentially an 8-week course that suggests having daily home practice that primarily involves doing guided mindfulness practice. So again, this was founded by Jon Kabat-Zinn in 1979 at UMass. And now it is recognized really around the world as an evidence-based intervention for many of the conditions that I mentioned earlier. So what exactly is it to do training or learning of MBSR? Well, the formal tools, you might say, are categorized as either moving or stillness. And the moving type practices consist of things like walking meditation, or maybe some of you are familiar with, how many have practiced yoga or Tai Chi or Qigong, any form of movement that is done really for the purposes of cultivating greater awareness, greater mind-body connection. These can all be classified as sort of moving meditations, if you will. Does that make sense? Cool. And then the stillness practices, some are done sitting, some are done in a lying down position, which of course the big danger there is that it becomes more like a nap, than a meditation. But anyway, but they all share one commonality, which is the intention to pay attention with an awareness that's kind and non-judgmental, like going back to what mindfulness is. But also, and this is really what I was describing earlier, sort of the informal practice, or how we just then go through our lives being aware moment to moment, no matter what it is. I gave you the example of shampooing and not knowing, did I already shampoo or not? When we're in the shower, it's really about being aware of not just the things on our to-do list or the problem from yesterday, but what's it like when that warm water's hitting the skin, or the smell of the shampoo, or the steam rising up to the ceiling fan. It's about noticing all of that, no matter what it is that we're doing. Eating and actually tasting our food. Many of us, I think, probably been conditioned to eat while we're doing other things, or to rush through our meals. About slowing down and really noticing. And lastly, I'll leave you kind of with this little technique that can be very useful. If you go back to that idea of shifting from reactions to responses, one way to start to intentionally do that is that when those little stress, we all have those little warning, I'll call them red flags, like, things are getting a little stressful, I'm starting to notice the anxiety coming up. When we become aware, okay, we have a stressful situation here. It's probably happened to all of us before too long, probably. Purposefully pausing, right? This is like taking our foot off of the gas pedal and pausing. Wait a second. Is there any way that I could just make a little bit of space here to pause for a second? And taking even a single conscious breath. Now, the reality is, fortunately, that will happen anyway, right? Even without our awareness of it. But if we actually know that we are breathing, we have now reintegrated this connection between mind and body. And then observing. This is perhaps where we bring everything that we talked about formal meditation into just a moment of awareness. Okay, something stressful's happened. I've paused, I've taken a breath. Now, normally our conditioning is that when in a stressful situation, we are kind of outwardly focused on taking care of others or what's happening in the surroundings. This is about taking care of what's in here. Oh, in this moment, yeah, the jaw's clenching, there's some fear coming up, and here I go again, beating myself up for making a mistake or something like that. So we can just simply observe, again, non-judgmentally, being able to tease apart. Remember the triad of awareness? Oh, what's happening in this moment is this, this, and this. And even if we did nothing more, it takes a lot of wherewithal. Sometimes this is like way more ambitious than I'm actually making it sound easy. But if we did nothing more than take a breath and realize right now, my 2 feet are on the floor. I'm right here. I'm right here. What we would do would essentially be our minds, which may be either wandering off into the past, making us feel very depressed, or our minds that are busy wandering off to the future, making us feel very anxious. We'll remember, right now, my 2 feet are right here in this moment. It's here. That's what that O might be, observing, being here right now. And then lastly, proceeding. This means we go through our day, we do what we need to do in a less automatic pilot, a less reactive, more responsive way, where we're making a choice, right? We're living, we're choosing the way to be that we want to be in the world. So that's what stop is all about. So, we're at the very end, my friends. And I want to pause just to see if there are more questions about anything that I've said so far. The last thing I'll do after this is just share a little bit about some resources. I appreciate your comments. You're really reminding me. This is such an innate capacity we're talking about. It's something that we all have and probably are much of the time. I think probably what brings us here is the fact that sometimes we forget. We forget, oh yeah, this is something I already know. I don't have any doubt that a lot of what I'm talking about, everyone here already has sense and experience of quite deeply. So, yeah, thank you for that.
So, isn't it good if you can engage in mindful activities such as, for example, for relaxation at night? I love to do the adult coloring books.
Yeah.
And if you use gel pens, you get really creative, and it's so relaxing. And you're creating, and you're being very mindful about what's on that page at that time.
Right.
Or knitting or anything.
Knitting
like
is another one that comes to mind. Yeah, for some people, it's being in nature and really being aware of the crunch of the leaves under the feet and right now this spring things shooting up but absolutely there are endless opportunities. It's just making that choice. What's the intention here? And there's no doubt that sometimes we just are so tired we just zone out and we need to just sit back and whatever we take in. But when we can, it's a choice. How am I allocating my attention in this moment?
I'm going to assume that the 8-week practice, you can change your brain waves, your mind thoughts, whatever you want to call it, from one thing to another. By simply being aware of, again, that moment where you're saying, I'm not worthy.
Right.
My boss was right. I'm an idiot.
Thoughts.
You'd say all those thoughts, and yes, that's happened to me. You take those thoughts and you say, wait a minute, that's one person's opinion. That's really not how I am. But that's what he thinks, and I'm not going to change his mind.
Right.
I can change my mind. I can change my perception of what that person is saying to me. And so it goes back to the stop thing. You don't necessarily have to be in an anxious moment.
Right.
But you can change the way you think about it if you notice how you're thinking in the first place.
Right. First have to notice.
Yes.
Without noticing, where are we? Yeah, please.
What would be the difference between mindfulness and meditation?
That's a great question. It's a great question.
Similarities.
So I would say first and foremost, the word meditation is sort of as broad as the word sports. So if we were talking about sports, there could be racket sports and soccer and basketball, fishing, or, that's about meditation. There are all types of meditation going back hundreds of years and spiritual traditions and so forth. So meditation is more of the sort of structured exercise, whereas mindfulness is both simply a way of being. So it's both. It's simply a way of being that we're going through our life aware, moment to moment. Doing formal meditation helps. So it's also that way of being, and when we specifically refer to mindfulness meditation, then we're referring to a specific type of meditation. For instance, back in the 70s, transcendental meditation, TM, was very popular. It's very different. It uses a mantra, repeating a phrase over and over and over again. And that isn't exactly what we're talking about here. It's not necessarily what's present in the moment. So that's just what I mean about sort of the broad use of the word meditation. Does that help?
Yes.
Yeah,
Thank you.
great. Thanks. Please.
Can you explain on this handout the difference between the mindfulness-based stress reduction and then the mindfulness self-compassion?
Sure,
And how
sure.
each of those are taught?
Yes, I can. Yeah, I can. Let me come back to that because I have something up here a little bit about the resources, and I think that'll be a good place. So first, I just want to mention, and some of these are listed on the resource list. Wherever you go, there you are is one of Jon Kabat-Zinn's most classic texts, easy to read. Also, 10% Happier, I think, is there on the list, and the MBSR workbook are just, some of my favorites. There are so many options out there. These are just a few. Also, I think listed on the resource list is a really wonderful app called the Insight Timer, where there are literally thousands, ranging from 1 minute up to 1 hour, of different kinds of guided practices of literally all type. Again, going back to what I said about how broad the word meditation is, this app has everything, including things for kids and falling asleep and lots of things. And most of it's free. So I appreciate that there's a lot of content there for free. But to your question about classes, so through the Beaumont Center for Mindfulness, which we really pride ourselves on currently being the only center for mindfulness that is affiliated with a hospital here in the state of Michigan. There's also a Grand Rapids Center for Mindfulness, there's an Ann Arbor Center for Mindfulness, but we are the only ones associated with a hospital. And so right now, we are offering a host of different programs, courses, retreats, teacher training, etc. And the question about what's the difference between, so mindfulness-based stress reduction is really the gold standard. It's been around since 1979. It's taught very much around the things that I talked about today, developing formal and informal mindfulness practice. Just in the last decade, another group by a woman by the name of a Harvard psychologist named Chris Germer and a developmental psychologist named Kristen Neff developed sort of a variation of MBSR that is specifically to teach the skills of self-compassion. So you might wonder, well, what the heck is self-compassion? It's essentially just, many of us are well aware of what it would be like to be compassionate to others, to really be there with them in their struggle, to be there with them when they're hurting, when they're disappointed, and to be kind, to be caring, to remind them they're not alone. Self-compassion is learning to be that way toward ourselves, which for so many of us is just very, very challenging. It's cultural, I think, for us that it's just challenging. We're almost conditioned to be compassionate to others and somehow be really hard on ourselves. So the 8-week course in self-compassion mirrors the format of the stress reduction course, but it's much more about becoming kinder to ourselves and less critical. So I hope that helps to answer your question about that.
And are these run consecutively?
They do. All of our programs run year-round. We try to switch up a little bit in terms of day and time and location and that sort of thing. Right now we're really in the process of trying to grow and hopefully eventually have more classes, more teachers, more opportunities. But right now we are just 2. So Anyhow, I've included our contact info here, and of course, I'm more than happy to
Is that
help.
on your paperwork?
Yeah, it is.
It is, I believe,
It's
yeah.
right on the point.
Oh, there it is, yeah, it's on the bottom there. Yeah, but, please.
What is a Beaumont team member?
A Beaumont team member is anyone who's either an employee, a physician, a volunteer, anyone who, you know, for the lack of a better word, has a badge. That's what we call a team member.
Employees.
But it's a little broader than that because it's also volunteers and other such. But please,
Does insurance cover any of this, and what circumstances will it?
you know, I've certainly heard cases that yes, it does, but I don't think often. You know, perhaps first.
What if you had a medical issue?
Right. I think it would be like, for instance, through flexible spending through a FSA
Okay.
account. To be honest, I have not. It seems to be happening much more in other countries and even other states. It doesn't seem to be happening. Insurance doesn't. We're not there yet here. You have to remember a lot of this has been very much going on in the East Coast and the West Coast for decades. And here in Michigan, it's really just been in the last
So
decade
they
or
don't,
so.
they don't feel that this is a treatment for mental illnesses at all?
There are, so for instance, there's and there's just very few. In terms of the certification that we have to teach this, there are only 5 certified people in Michigan. So it's still so new here. There is a woman who's a therapist in downtown Rochester, and she can sometimes bill insurance companies, but it's usually done more as a one-on-one. So that's one way to do it. Yeah. Please.
Is there a local group
Local
to these classes here?
to Orion Township?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oakland County.
yeah. I mean, so a lot of the classes we do teach in Troy, Royal Oak, are probably the closest. Farmington Hills, that's currently where
So go to the website.
right. And some of our programs meet live online, so people are joining in from wherever they are. We get people from the Thumb, we get people from Northern Michigan, because people are just joining on their phone or their computer, a lot of times by video conference, so it's sort of like we're face to face. Just sort of nice, especially if you don't like to drive or travel. So please.
Go back to the screen about the book.
Yes. Yeah. Please.
Are these books available online?
I would think so. Absolutely, I would think so. You mean to purchase hard copies or to download ebooks, like
Yeah.
Kindle?
Either on Kindle or...
I would think so. These are all pretty common, or been out there for a while.
They're on Amazon.
Yeah, they're on Amazon. Yeah, thanks for confirming. All right. Well, I really appreciate your presence and participation.
Well, thank you, Lucy, for coming.
Pleasure. Thank you.